So today we're talking about district days, meeting your legislator in your community. My name is Carissa, and I will be hosting you guys today for a webinar. So let's just give you a roadmap of what we're going to be covering today in our webinar. One, we'll go through who's speaking to you today. We have a number of great speakers that are going to talk about district days, information that you should have that you might want to talk with your legislator about, framing your message. So we have a lot of great experts and even a guest speaker here today. So we'll talk about what district days are, why you should engage in them. We'll have a guest speaker today talk about their experience. We will talk about legislative issues that you can talk about that are timely, how to frame your message, and also some resources we're providing you guys to make it super, super easy and quick for you guys to schedule your meetings and have effective meetings. So who's here? I'm Carissa again. I am up on the upper left-hand corner there. I'm joined by my colleagues in public affairs, Brittany Webster.
Hi, everyone. I'm one of AGU's two senior specialists, meaning basically I represent AGU on the Hill.
Hi, I'm Carissa Bunge. I am the other specialist here at AGU.
And we have our newest addition, Ashley Gilliam, sorry.
Hi, guys. Great to be here.
And then our guest speaker today, Denise Hills, who's joining us remotely.
Hi, everyone.
So let's get to it. District visits, what are they and why should you engage? So the first thing I kind of wanted to show you guys is the legislative agenda. I think this is really important for understanding why now is a great time to engage. So this is really the calendar year, but one thing to really note here that I want to highlight is that September is basically wrapping up fiscal year 2017. The new fiscal year 2018 starts in October. As you may have read in the news or have been tracking, Congress is dealing with the appropriations process or how much funding, say, science is going to get for FY 2018. That's all happening right now. So we don't have that much time to figure that all out before the new fiscal year starts. So this is really a key moment for us to talk about why science needs robust funding and its value to our nation. So AGU is very engaged in this process. We've seen some pretty drastic proposed cuts to our federal science agencies. We've seen some legislative proposals that are concerning for science, and AGU is really engaged to work hard to help ensure that science is supported either through strong funding or through legislation that allows scientists to really do the great science that they've been doing. So we do a lot of outreach to the Hill, to the administration, to talk to them about the value of science, tell them why strong funding is really important for the innovations that we see, for our national security, for public health, for our economy. And we really just try to build those relationships so that our legislators understand what earth and space science is and why it's valuable. Even though we're doing that year long, we really need your help. You are a valuable, valuable resource and voice, and we can't be as effective without you. So this is the Congressional Calendar. The Congressional Calendar basically outlines when Congress is in session, meaning they're in DC working, what you see on C-SPAN, and then also when they're back doing district work, which means they go back to their home district, they're talking to constituents, they're learning about the priorities of their district. District days happen throughout the year, but there's a couple key periods during the calendar year where we have these extended district days, and that includes August. August is a time where your legislator will be back home for basically the month of August, except maybe the Senate, who has extended their time on the Hill. But they'll be back in the district for the sole purpose of learning more about what their constituents are concerned about, what their priorities are, and taking that back to the Hill with them so they can effectively represent you as your elected official. So August is a great time to engage for a number of reasons. One, that means your legislator is going to be close to home. So you don't have to travel. You don't have to come out to DC to talk to your legislator about these important issues. They're home during this time really to talk to you. It's also a key moment in the legislative process, as I showed. Appropriations is happening right now. This is where we need to really advocate for science and tell why science is valuable, why it's essential for our nation, and why it needs robust funding. AGU this year is providing a ton of step-by-step resources to make it super easy and map out exactly everything you need to do with examples, just so that it's as easy as possible for you to really engage right now. And I think now more than ever, science really does need you. It needs our voice collectively to talk about the value of science. We've seen some really drastic proposed cuts in the president's budget. Even some of the early bills that have come out of the House have showed some pretty drastic cuts to our research enterprise. I think now is the time for us to talk about why those cuts are going to hurt science and, in effect, make us less effective or hurt our economy by not supporting this enterprise that really stimulates a lot of these areas. And lastly, your voice matters. I think sometimes I hear a lot from folks that they're not sure if they're going to make a difference by having meetings with their legislator, but your voice really does matter. There's actually been some research about how effective you are as a constituent with talking with your legislators. I really like this graph because the organization that gathered this research basically asked members of Congress if their job satisfaction is tied to staying in touch with constituents. And overwhelmingly, members of Congress believe that because they represent you. You're a constituent, you have voting power, they are supposed to represent you. So it's very important for them to be in touch with you, to know your values, to know what your concerns are in order to effectively represent you. The other thing that I think is really powerful is understanding that your voice can make a difference. I think there's misconception that lobbyists are the most effective influencers on the Hill. It turns out that when polled, staffers, members of Congress, really believe that constituents are the greatest voice. Lobbyists come around all the time. Constituents not as much as probably the lobbyists do, but your voice is more impactful. So you really should take the opportunity to use that voice. Again, they're representing you. They need to know what your concerns and priorities are. And if you're not reaching out, then they can't really represent you as effectively as you want them to. So now is your time to really make that connection, reach out to them, and make your voice heard. Because as AGU is advocating for you, we really need your voice because it's even more influential than ours. So now I'm going to pass it over to Brittany. Brittany's going to talk to you about some of the policy issues that you can discuss during your meetings.
Great, thanks, Tamia. So I'm going to run through some issues that you might want to talk about during your meetings in addition to your own science and the value of your science. So I'm going to start off by talking about some budgetary and funding issues, and then I'm going to talk about some actual legislation and kind of broader policy issues that can have an impact on science policy. So when you hear about the federal budget, what we're really talking about are kind of the two big budget categories. And the two categories are mandatory spending, which is the blue part or the dark purple part of this pie. And mandatory spending includes, basically it happens automatically, and normally it's done by like a formula, so something like Social Security or Medicare, and it can also be referred to as entitlement spending. And so this is determined by eligibility as opposed to the appropriations process. So the section here that's purple is actually discretionary spending, which is the other big category, and this is steered by the appropriations process and committee. And this is the chunk that science and research funding falls into. And you'll see at the bottom of the total federal spending, science accounts for only 1%. So it's 1% of that purple section right there. So keep that in mind when you hear about the challenges of balancing the budget and potentially cutting science to make up for spending elsewhere. And you also you'll also hear often about people discussing a shrinking part of the pie for discretionary funding, and kind of going back to that 1%. You know, 1% of 2.2 trillion or 2.4 trillion is much different than 1% of 1.2 trillion. But, you know, you actually have an opportunity to kind of affect these larger budgetary decisions when meeting with your legislators this August, because neither the House nor the Senate has passed a budget resolution, meaning these numbers have not yet been decided and are not set in stone. You can still impact how your members of Congress allocate federal resources. So now I'm going to talk more specifically about funding for our federal science agencies. Thanks, Jamia. So using FY17 as a baseline here, the first line is going to be the President's budget request, and the second line is the recent House appropriations spending levels. And these are done as a percent change from FY17. And so although many people thought that the President's proposed budget was kind of dead on arrival, you can see that a lot of the agencies that he proposed cutting, or a lot of programs, still saw significant cuts. And these are cuts that are actually in legislation. Because although the President's budget is just a request, the House appropriation bills do have the potential to become law and can kind of be seen as the House of Representatives' kind of opening bargaining position. Now, the Senate has not yet written their appropriation bills, and none of these bills have yet been voted or passed by the House of Representatives. So there really is still time to talk to your lawmakers about these numbers and urge them to increase funding for our science agenda. And I just want to show that, you know, I think we all saw a lot of these numbers for the first time this week, and I think the outlook is not good. So really now is the time, and we really do need your help, but also to, you know, by showing up and talking to your member of Congress is truly one of the most powerful things you can do. And I think weighing in, especially on a lot of these cuts we're seeing, really can make a difference, especially if you can bring a friend. So now I'm going to talk to kind of some specific pieces of legislation that we're also seeing, which you may want to talk to, especially if you study land size, for example. And all of these bills have been introduced to this Congress, and you may want to urge your member to either support or oppose the legislation by, let's say, co-sponsoring the bill or voting for the bill a certain way if they have the opportunity. And the two categories we tend to see are hazards related or related to the issue of scientific integrity. So all of these bills have been introduced, as I mentioned, and HR designates that it's a House of Representatives bill, and S designates it's been introduced in the Senate. Some of them have been introduced in both chambers. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail. There's lots of bills here, but if you want to know more about any of the bills, check out congress.gov. So if you search by the title or the bill number, you can find a summary of the bill that's kind of written in plain English. You can find out where the bill stands in the process, and also whether your member of Congress is already a sponsor of the bill. So lastly, I'm going to discuss some big picture science policy issues that perhaps don't have any specific legislation attached to them, but are kind of part of the current science policy political discourse, we'll say. And I know that we've heard from our members, you all, on a great number of these issues. And just because an issue doesn't have a piece of legislation attached to it, it doesn't mean that you can't raise the issue with your legislator. You can still mention that you're concerned or support an issue, but I would urge you to have a concrete action for them to take in regard to the issue. Maybe you want them to write a letter, you want them to issue a statement, you want them to ask for more information to discover the truth behind a claim or something that you're hearing. Just make sure that you give your member a way to show that they acted on the issue and kind of addressed your concern. You know, walking into an office and saying, you know, I want you to support something without a specific action, every member will always tell you, of course I support that issue, and then they'll go and do nothing because you've given them nothing to do. So just something to think about, you know, do you want them to appoint a science advisor or, you know, ask the president specifically in a letter or something. Just make sure that you somehow ask them to do something concretely so that you can assess whether they did or did not, I guess, fulfill your ask.
So now I'll turn it over to Carissa, who's going to talk about how you can effectively communicate your science to policymakers and really craft that message.
Thanks, Tamia. So this is going to build off perfectly of what Brittany was just chatting about. We're going to jump right in and talk about some of the key components that you're going to want to think about in your meeting and as you're crafting your message and preparing for your meeting. So really the first thing on this list that we have is the ask, which Brittany referred to earlier. This is something that might be a little unnatural to you at first, but this is something that's expected in a congressional meeting, whether on the Hill or in the district. So typically in a meeting, you will start with introductions and do maybe a minute of small talk, exchange business cards, and really just try to warm up to the person that you are speaking with. And then you'll jump right into what exactly it is that you're asking them to do. And like Brittany mentioned, you really want this to be as specific as possible. So we kind of have three buckets here that that might land in. So the first thing we have up here is a specific bill or amendment. And you saw that list of what Brittany had up. You could be asking members of Congress to support a bill. You could also be asking them to not support something, to not vote for something. And the second thing we have on here is appropriations and funding. Again, something that Brittany brought up. Looking back at those slides will be very helpful so that you can kind of call back to what exactly you want them to do. Do you want them to restore funding perhaps to FY17 levels? Do you want to see a % increase? Again, do you want to see them reject cuts? Those are all really great things to ask for in a meeting. And now more than ever, kind of how Tamia showed that whole calendar, we are right in the throes of the appropriations process. So this is a really great ask for August recess. And then the third thing we have on here is the relationship request. And this might not be specific, but a specific thing you're asking for, but you could ask a staffer to just use you as a resource when questions come up, when they're dealing with perhaps a piece of legislation that you could serve as an expert on the topic area. And that's really a longer term ask. That's something that you are partially responsible for because you're going to need to follow up with that office regularly. So now that you've thought a little bit about what you want to ask in a meeting, you're going to want to try to persuade the staffer, kind of why they should do what you're asking them to do. And a really great way to do this is to find shared values with that person and with the office. So up here are a few things you might want to look into in terms of not only the member of Congress, but the staffer as well. What district or state are they representing? That's going to tell you a lot about their constituents, the people that are voting them into office, and therefore the things that they really care about. What was their former occupation? Were they a teacher? Were they a lawyer? Perhaps they were also a scientist. That will give you an indication of kind of their knowledge level on certain areas. And then looking into what committees and caucuses they sit on. Typically, if a member of Congress is on a committee, it's expected that there's a little more expertise in that area. So if you're meeting with someone from, say, the Armed Services Committee, you might want to frame your research in a way that provides value to defense. And kind of really bringing it home for them. And then lastly, legislation. So what kind of bills are they introducing? What kind of bills are they co-sponsoring? And really just looking into recent votes that they have made, because that's going to give you an indication of what they care about, where their values are. And another great thing with legislation is if you see something you like, making sure that you thank them when you go into that meeting and saying, hey, I saw you voted this way recently. I really appreciate that. Starting with a thank you is always a really, really great way to go. And a lot of times making these connections and shared values is easier with district offices. If you're referring to the district and you're meeting with the district staffer, they probably know the intersection that you're talking about or the landmark that you're talking about. They're much more probably familiar with the constituency. So now that you kind of know how you're going to make those shared values, how can you look into that? How can you find this information? So the first place that we really try to point people to is looking at their websites. There's usually a very descriptive biography of the member of Congress. You usually find their past occupations there. And again, you can find their websites just by these standard URLs, depending on if it's a House or Senate member. And then if you want to look into, what kind of legislation they introduced and co-sponsored, again, congress.gov is a really great resource, as well as govtrack.us. Another thing I meant to mention with legislation, if you're coming in and asking, for your member of Congress to support something or support a bill, and they say, oh, we already introduced a bill that does exactly that, you might look like you don't really know what you're talking about. So that's another reason that you should really look into what kind of legislation they're introducing. And then social media, obviously pretty much every member of Congress has a Twitter now, and that's a really great way to see what are the hot topics, what are the things that they cared about this morning. That's always a great way to think about what you really want to focus on in your meeting. And then finally, you may not know this, but you probably have government relations staff at your institution. Those people are a wealth of knowledge. They can help you put together materials for your meeting and really help you prepare your message even further. So another thing that we try to encourage when thinking about crafting your message is how you're going to tell your story. You don't want to just walk in and say, this is what I'm asking for, I want funding, that's it. You really want to bring it home, make it personal. So there's actually science behind why telling a story helps your audience connect with your message. People really do remember stories better than facts and figures, and science has shown that our brains actually mirror each other when storytelling. So you can kind of imagine yourself doing something as someone's telling you a story. And storytelling also increases trust, which is really important, again, in building a relationship. You really want to create that long-term relationship with the staffer. So the more that you can connect with them on a human level and really try to tell a story with your message, the more likely you are to achieve your goal. And we know that scientists sometimes are not taught necessarily to communicate in a specific, or not taught to communicate in that storytelling manner. We like to just present the facts. So here's a little crash course for you if you need some ideas to get you started. Every story really has these 5 key components. And the most important one we like to highlight here is conflict. So you probably want to start with that and then figure out the rest. And this conflict could be something that has to do with your research. What issue are you trying to find a solution to? What's the problem or the question that prompted your research? You could also make this a personal conflict. You could make your story about your personal academic journey, or how you became interested in whatever science you are studying right now. So that's a really great tool for thinking about how you can start crafting this story. And then again, this is another template to kind of get your mind thinking about this. This is created by a former Pixar story artist. So really thinking about that conflict in the space of one day, insert conflict, and then kind of giving an ending to your story, whether that's I'm still researching this topic, but here's what we know, or whatever it may be, really having a beginning, middle, and end. So now that you've thought about how to craft your message as a story, I'd like to shift just briefly to discuss how to deal with controversial topics. So you may be speaking with your policymaker or staffer about something like climate science, something like energy policy, where things have recently been politicized, and so we have some pointers for how to address what could become a more heated issue. So the first thing is really doing your research ahead of time, and really starting with your common ground and your shared values, which goes back to that research that you would be doing before your meeting anyways. But really thinking about how can you connect, and not making it as us versus them thing, but really speaking from the same values as your audience. And then the second tip we have on here is anticipating what might be contentious. Really try to think about what questions you're afraid of being asked in the meeting. What are the topics you don't want to be brought up? And then kind of coming up with some messages that you would want to say in response to a really difficult question or someone perhaps trying to antagonize you. And then finally, preparing those main messages in advance. So really being prepared with your key points so that you can shift that conversation back to your main message if needed. So in order to do that, here are a few example transition statements. Something like, I see where you're going with that question, but what's really important here is, or that wasn't the focus of our research, but what we found is, and really trying not to get too frustrated, just being prepared with kind of how you're going to pivot your message and make sure that what you want to say is being heard. So the final thing we have on here is after your meeting. So again, back to that relationship ask. Really trying to follow up and build trust with the office. You don't want your meeting to just be a one-time thing. You want to meet with them and then be able to follow up with them if you either see something good happening about the issue you care about, if you're concerned about something, or just checking in. So a couple of ways to kind of build this trust and build this relationship. Definitely make sure that you send a thank you note after your meeting. And include any information that you promised you would follow up with. And really, you know, making sure that you're following up with them. You may want to create a reminder, perhaps quarterly, to kind of just shoot them an email, remind them that you are there as a resource. And the second thing we have on here is attending events in the district, which you would already be doing because you're doing a district visit. But there may be additional public events, town halls, you know, and really trying to find those opportunities to meet with that staffer. So those are our pointers for after the meeting, and yeah, thank you.
So next we're going to shift gears a little bit, and Denise Hills is going to chat with you about her experience doing congressional visits with us. Denise is really amazing, actually. She did congressional visits with us this year as part of a push to meet with our members here in DC. She did a workshop with us and then went on to meet with a number of congressional offices that were her representatives both in the House and in the Senate. She's going to really talk about the hurdles that you may think are there that you can really overcome with some of the resources that we have. But before I let her start, I want to just give a little background on Denise. So Denise is a geoscientist at the Geological Survey of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. She was trained as a marine geophysicist and is currently the director of Energy Investigations Program at the survey. Her research, often federally funded, focused on energy resource assessment, which includes traditional and unconventional hydrocarbon assessment, non-hydrocarbon geologic energy sources, man, this is a tongue twister, and geologic carbon sequestration. In addition to her research, Denise is involved in data rescue and preservation initiatives at the survey. She's chair of the Geoinformatics Division at the Geological Society of America and the president-elect of the Earth-Based Science Informatics Focus Group here at AGU. She has a ton of other things that she's involved in that would take probably a little longer to talk through. So I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Denise.
Great, thanks. Speak up if you can't hear me. Okay. Could you go ahead and advance to my next slide? Thanks. So, first off, you guys are obviously interested in doing something like this, but really I kind of wanted to do this a little bit like you would do a congressional visit. The why. Why are you here? Why are we doing this? Why did we offer this webinar? Well, we all know science is essential, and I want you guys to be an advocate for science as well. We all are scientists because we love kind of the cool stuff, the dinosaurs and all of that. But, you know, science impacts our lives every day, and so we need to make sure that other people understand how that science influences what goes on every single day. If we don't speak up, who's going to? Go ahead and next slide, please. So what are we asking you to do? We're asking you to meet face-to-face with people. Meeting face-to-face builds those relationships. It helps them humanize what you're talking about. If it's in the abstract, if people just send emails or things like that, you don't make that connection. It's a lot harder to say no to something when it has a human face to it. So even if the research doesn't directly deal with people, it can influence what all we do, right? Because geoscience research, impacts what NASA does, and we know all the cool inventions that we get from NASA. But even our basic research does impact everybody's day-to-day life. Going to talk to your legislators or other policymakers. So this next slide here, what I thought it would be like. I thought I would be petrified, scared. These people are important. They've been elected. They're almost famous. But how am I going to make any impact on these people? But really, go ahead and do the next one, please. This is what I really felt like when I went through our congressional visit up in DC. I felt so empowered. The staffers, I met primarily with staffers, which was, it can be a little surprising when you're first getting involved. You're not going to be meeting with the actual congressperson. You're going to meet with their staffers, and they're the ones that actually have an awful lot of the power. They don't have enough time to do all the research that they need to do, but they have to be ready right away with an answer to any specific question that that the legislator that they work for has a question about. So by being there, by talking to these staffers, you're building a relationship, you're humanizing your science, and you're becoming a resource for those people. I've got to tell you, it wasn't always simple and easy. Sometimes the questions were a bit more blunt than what I was expecting. I did get a question like, should I cut entitlements like Medicaid in order to fund your science funding? Which can throw you off your rhythm if you're not expecting it. But there are ways to address that sort of thing. Okay, next slide. So how do you go about doing this? Well, they've already talked a little bit about, your shared values. Particularly if you're meeting with your House person, they know where you live. They know your streets. They know your community. They know how maybe your research is helping support the community. My research brings funding into the state that makes jobs. And so that's a really important thing right now. Something AGU has great resources to help you craft your message. They helped me create what's called a one-pager, a leaf behind that had a little bit more detailed information. But one of the most important things that I got from my training at AGU is this idea of flipping the pyramid. That image down on the bottom, that triangle, scientists tend to do this, all this background information and the supporting details that all lead to this conclusion. As much as we want to do that, staffers and your legislators don't have the time for that. They need to hear what your ask is, what your most important thing is right away. Otherwise, you might not get to it because they might get called away. So this idea of flipping that pyramid to kind of reverse how we would normally talk about our science was really one of the biggest things that that all of us had to really work towards. Okay, next slide. And you can see we're all smiling in this picture. This was Team Alabama meeting with Mike Rogers, who is from Tuskegee, Alabama. So I'm in the green jacket. Lexi Schultz is on the right in this picture. She's from AGU. She really helped us navigate all of this. And Adam Kobleski from UAH, University of Alabama at Huntsville, and Prabhakar Clement, who is at Auburn University. So we got to meet with all these people, and it was tiring, it was hard, but it was an awful lot of fun. And I learned a lot about myself and about the people I was visiting with, and even more about my state. And so last slide, please. it really was an awful lot of fun, and I really encourage you to do it. Even if you don't have this, like this big fabulous group of people that I got to experience this with, find a buddy, find 2 or 3 people to help support you in this process, because you will learn more about you. You'll even learn a little bit more about your own science, I think. But also just to make those connections and to build those relationships. That's really what's important, and one of the big things I got out of my experience with the Congressional Visit Day. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was great. I love this picture because I obviously have a really excited face in the background there. Now we're going to... I was clearly very excited to be there. It was a ton of fun. But now we're going to pass over to Ashley, who's going to talk to you more about some of the resources that Denise mentioned. We have a ton of them online, and she's going to walk you through them so that you can see what's out there to help support you in your district visits this year.
Thank you, Tamia, and thank you, Denise. That was awesome. So we have a bunch of things that you can do to find more information about everything that we talked about today. The first thing that you can do is you can sign up for AGU Science Policy Alerts. If you sign up for that, you can stay up to date on current policy issues and actions you can take. We'll send you an email periodically with sort of what's going on, what's the latest in Congress. You can also share your science with your policymakers and talk about why science is essential. In the current funding environment, it's really up to us to make the case for science. So you can call, write, tweet, or meet with your legislator and make your voice heard. And if you don't know where to start, AGU has created some science policy toolkits to help prepare you to engage. So from social media to how to request a meeting with your member of Congress, AGU's got your back. You can check out our toolkits at sciencepolicy.agu.org/toolkits. So again, signing up for the AGU Science Policy Alerts is really useful to sort of give you a snapshot of what's going on, and it's super easy to sign up. All you have to do is head over to our main page at sciencepolicy.agu.org, and there'll be an awesome sign up button right on the front page. Just click on it, fill out your information, and you're good to go. Now more than ever is it important that we stand up for science and support science funding. And in the current funding environment, it's really up to us to make the case for science. Your voice as a constituent is more powerful than you realize. And if you're not sure exactly where to start or how to make an impact, we have a great tool on our website that makes it easy to get started and has links to help you contact your policymakers. It has instructional videos and resources so you can stay up to date on the latest legislation affecting the Earth and space science community. Another easy way to make your voice heard is through something that most of us use every day, which is social media. Share how your science research has impacted your life via Twitter, Facebook, etc. And if you're going to do that, be sure to use our hashtag #ScienceIsEssential. Now, if you feel like you need a little bit more help in getting information about science policy issues, crafting your message, or finding the right platform for your message, AGU has created some science policy toolkits to help prepare you to engage. From social media to calling or writing a letter to your member of Congress, we've got you covered. And in fact, we have a great toolkit that will really supplement all the information in this webinar. Our How to Have an Effective District Visit toolkit will give you step-by-step instructions on how to request a meeting, what to say during the meeting, what and who to bring with you to the meeting, and even what to wear to the meeting. The start of the August recess is only a few weeks away, and we want you to feel as informed as possible before you meet with your legislator. Sign up for AGU Science Policy Alerts and follow us on Twitter at AGU Sci Policy to stay up to date on what's going on in the science policy world. And if you're planning on doing a district visit, which we highly recommend, with your legislator, we really, really want to hear about it. Tweet to us, take photos, use the hashtag #DistrictDays, and share your experience with us in a brief survey. And for even more information on the upcoming district days, be sure to check out our website made specifically for this, which is sciencepolicy.agu.org/districtdays. And as we close out, we'd also like to mention, or we'd like to make people aware of another great tool that AGU offers, which is called Sharing Science. The program encompasses all of the resources, workshops, hands-on support, and opportunities AGU provides to help scientists effectively communicate with broader audiences, including journalists, educators, students, policymakers, and the public about Earth and space science and its importance. So be sure to check it out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashley.
Yeah.
So that concludes what we had prepared for the webinar today, but we have plenty of time to answer any and all questions you may have about messages, about scheduling meetings, about what it's like. So feel free to type in your question into the chat box, and we will answer any and all questions. So we have one question that's here already, asking what we mean by the government fiscal year calendar. When does fiscal year 2018 start and when it ends? That's a good question. Fiscal year in Congress and government start October 1st. So for fiscal year 2018, that fiscal year will start October 1st, 2017, and will run through August or September of 2018. So fiscal year 2018 actually spans from the end of 2017 through the beginning of 2018.
So the next question I see is, how do you respond to questions like, should I cut Medicaid to fund your science? In an intellectual and thoughtful way. I realize it's a false dichotomy, but what's your suggestion for addressing these types of questions?
Well, one of the things that I would think about is, again, with kind of that whole controversial topic section, having a transition statement prepared for if you get asked a question like that. And something that, you know, we would definitely encourage is don't answer that question. You don't need to give them an answer. You know, you could say something like, I'd really rather leave that to the experts and the appropriation staffers. I just want to tell you, you know, what my priorities are and what I would like to see, and not kind of fall into that trap of then getting into an argument about Medicaid.
And I think also on top of that, when you're saying that, you know, you're not trying to weigh in on that debate, but rather tell you about the value of science, really connect that to things like how science is really important for our economy. And so you may not answer the question directly because that's probably not a topic you want to get roped into, but you can talk about the value of science to things that are kind of related to our budget, which I still think is a useful thing to kind of get across.
This is Denise. I did get asked that question on one of my visits, and how we responded to it was pretty much like what they were just suggesting. I was the one who answered it well, you know, that's not really my area of expertise. Other people know more about how to go about crafting the whole budget. I just want to remind you of the importance of, you know, what we're asking for, and you may have to make those decisions.
So we have a question for Denise. Question is, what were you most afraid of, and did it happen in your meetings?
I was afraid I wouldn't be taken seriously. I will freely admit that I have a huge imposter syndrome, so I'm always afraid someone's going to catch me out and they're going to find out that I'm a fake, even though I know intellectually I'm not. But I've got to say, the training and the prep that we had ahead of time really gave me a whole lot of confidence that, yeah, I do actually know what I'm talking about. I know I was prepared for kind of those gotcha type questions, and I relied on the information that AGU provided for me. So even though I did get that kind of gotcha question, I felt like I could handle it. So I hope that answers the question.
I think that's really good. Another question we have is, what is the best way to assess the level of scientific understanding of the congressman or woman, appreciate that, or their staffers for your topic when you're trying to do the ask?
I would say this is actually a great opportunity to make sure that, I don't know if we mentioned this, but this is a great way by kind of stopping and pausing occasionally as you're talking about your ask, stopping and checking in and being like, you know, have you heard about this? Do you know about this? I don't know if we mentioned that your meeting should really feel like a conversation. Ideally, you want the staffer, the member of Congress, to talk about 50% of the time, be almost like a job interview. Like you're telling them about your priorities, and then you're learning more about their priorities, so that the next time when you meet, you know, you can be, let's say, at a level 5 as opposed to, you know, the starting line. So I think just checking in with them and asking if they're familiar with things. But I would also say, too, you know, a lot of congressional meetings happen in 30 minutes or less, so make it easy for them. You know, make it so that you could be talking to your neighbor or just any random person on the street. You know, don't make them work for it, because at the end of the day, you are kind of asking them for something. They also represent you, so they should care about what you're talking about, but make it easy for them to connect with you about your issue.
Agreed. The only thing I'll add is, if you wanted to know if maybe the staffer has like a science background or like, you know, maybe perhaps like studied anything science related, you could probably find them on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If you got their name.
And I would also say just ask. You never know, especially because I know a lot of our members are coming from universities. You know, maybe you guys are alumni, or maybe you teach at the school they went to. That can be a great way to kind of form a bond really easily and quickly in a meeting as well. I also just want to mention, you know, we've been talking a lot about the resources we have online, but also, too, you have 6 amazing people here at AGU who work in the Public Affairs Department, and we're always available for a call or for you to email us as well, especially if you have some specific questions or you want to talk through, or, you know, you'd like someone to look at your one-pager. We're always here as well for help. And if you email sciencepolicy@agu.org, one of us generally will respond. We try to do it within 24 hours, so don't be afraid to call or email us directly as well.
So we have a question. I mentioned that the Senate recess is delayed. When can we expect them to be in their district? According to reports that just came out, I think Senator McConnell came out and said that they were going to extend their time in D.C., mostly because they have a packed legislative calendar and they only have so much time to make sure all of those things that they have prioritized get done and are considered. So he's mentioned that they will be in session for the first couple weeks of August. So a good time may be towards the end of August if you're interested in meeting with your senator, but you can always schedule meetings with your representatives in the district, and that might be a good first meeting to have with your friend that you brought along and get your message out and just get the feel for a meeting, and then you'll be super prepped for that Senate meeting. So not seeing any other questions, so we'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. Really, please email us, use our resources, just really get out there and make sure your voice gets heard. And I guess I will just ask if anybody else has any last comments before we say bye. Denise, do you have any last comments for folks?
Well, you know, it's not as scary as it seems. Once you do it once, it's a lot easier to do it again. And really, I'll second what Tania was saying. The public affairs staff is fabulous. They are really approachable. And they have so much information, and they're so happy to share it and help you present yourself in the best way that you can. So I really encourage you to take advantage, not take advantage, but use them as a resource.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Denise, for being our guest speaker and talking about your experience today. It was, I think, very helpful and really good to hear from fellow scientists about their experience in policy. And thank you again to everyone who's joined us today. We will send you an email and let you know where the slides are and the recording is, so you can feel free to share that with your network, get more people on board with District Days this year. And we look forward to hearing about all your stories and seeing all your pictures about the visits that you had. Thanks, guys.